Olli from Mindfield Games, VR developer. He'll probably be along at some point. We'll just get going, because otherwise, eating into your time, we wouldn't want to do that. So we're here to talk about the future of games, which is a very broad subject. Lots of things we could talk about, but due to time restraints, we're not going to get to everything. So if you do want to hear about like the inevitable decline and death of consoles, then maybe think up some questions for the end. And there will be questions, and there's a lot of insight and experience on the stage, so you should take the opportunity if you can. But certainly the things we're going to concentrate on probably mostly are going to be mobile and VR, because I think those are the, well, ones like the most relevant to the Casual Connect audience, and the other ones like the hot topic of the moment. But to introduce everyone, this is Nizar Romdan. He's a director of the developer ecosystem at ARM. So Nizar, like, you've been working at ARM for a decade, about that long. What role does looking towards the future play in your job? I imagine it's quite a big part of what you do.
Yes, that's quite a big chunk of what I do with developers. So at ARM, my role is to ensure developers, particularly mobile developers, understand the capability of the ARM processors that are used in most smartphones and tablets. So they make the best of these processors, optimize the performance, for example, but also educate them what is coming in the future from hardware perspective. What is it they should expect in 2 years, 3 years, and even 5 years from now, so that they start preparing themselves and plan how they will use these capabilities. And it's important for us as well, because to sustain the roadmap of processors, we need to develop the content has to use the features we implement, so to catch up. So it's
that's like a two-way street then, basically. Yes. They lead you, you lead them, and then the rest of us get what we're given.
Yeah, absolutely, because we need to know what you guys do with these processors, what are the problems, the pain points, so that we plan that into the roadmap. Yes, that's both ways.
The useful man to have on stage. Sat next to him is Peter Blumel. You used to be the producer of Call of Duty, if my information is correct, but you're actually doing something which I find, well, even more interesting than that. You are the co-founder and CEO of the Rogue Initiative, which was unveiled just last week, I think. Is that right? That's a VR production company which goes beyond games. I wonder, like, coming from a more traditional gaming background, how your view of the importance of understanding the future has changed now you're going into VR, which is about the most future-facing tech we've got imminently coming in at the moment.
No, I mean, looking at what VR is going to be and how it's going to be made, to me it's really about getting game guys doing stuff. There's a lot of room for all kinds of storytellers, but at the end of the day, the most compelling experiences are done in an engine with guys who know how to use an engine, whether that's Unity or Unreal. And so for us, for the Rogue Initiative, that was all about taking guys that know how to make stuff in an engine, first-person immersive experiences, and putting them towards a new platform, something exciting again. And for all of us at Rogue Initiative, getting into VR was something that was really, really super cool. It's definitely contagious. So for us, it was a no-brainer. Let's just do it. It's going to be fun.
Okay. And third in the line there is Devon Radford. He's the Vice President of Mobile at Fox Digital Entertainment, which is a very big job title that you have there. You're responsible for licensing the entire IP catalogue at Fox.
I'm humble, sorry.
That's okay. This is Olli. We'll get to you in a second.
I'm usually late and also in conference.
Okay. But so, Devin,
welcome.
Of everyone on the stage, your job to me would seem like the one where you most have to gauge what's going on right now as opposed to what's happening in sort of 2, 3, 4 years' time. Is that about accurate, or am I totally wrong on that?
I think, look, we have the luxury of finding partners. We sort of, instead of going down the route of what some other big studios have done in games, we've decided, instead of investing in teams and big studios, we've built a small, lean licensing team. So, we have the luxury of finding the best partners who are looking to the future and doing the best things. And so, I don't necessarily have to be as much of a prognosticator as others do. I just have to find the right talent and find the right partnership.
Well, I mean, I think in the games industry, everyone has to look to the future to an extent, but like there's only so far you can accurately predict anyway, right? So like the next year, the next 2 years, probably a much more useful thing to focus on for everyone anyway. Fourth up, we have Henry Lowenfels, who's Vice President of Business Development at Scopely. That's mobile publishing, which is quite a big and complicated market to tackle, I think. So how far ahead do you look into the future as part of your day-to-day work?
Yeah, I mean, at its core, my job is essentially trying to find the next big thing. As a game publisher, we're thinking at least 18 months out when we start developing a game. So, we really do need to kind of look down the road a little bit. We obviously look a lot at market trends and study what's happening today, but that really informs how we see the future. So, I think my job is pretty well suited to being on this panel because I'm constantly thinking at least 2 years out.
Yeah. Okay, and last up, the late arrival, Olli Sinerma, who is a co-founder of Mindfield Games. I played your game actually about a year ago now, I think, something like that. I think it might be at Gamescom or something. Now, you've been a designer for a decade or more, I think. You used to work for Red Links, and now you're in VR. I mean, I wonder, do you find that design principles stay constant, or are you now working on a more future-facing idea of what game design is?
For VR, what has totally changed? It's a totally new medium. It's like many people you hear comparing it to. It's pretty much the same as when mobile come, when you change from feature phones into smartphones, but it's totally different. I pretty much compare it to the coming of the internet, in a sense, because what we have here is something totally new. Nobody knows. Everybody is like, oh, that's the coolest thing ever. You can actually see different worlds and everything, all of that. But nobody pretty much has figured out what to do money out of it at this point. Yeah. Except of course the adult entertainment industry. They are waiting for it.
Well, yeah, and you need people to actually buy the headsets first as well.
Exactly. That is one thing that is
big first step, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, now we got a bit of a split in terms of disciplines here. We got a couple of VR people, some mobile people. Nizar probably straddles the whole lot. But I do want to start on mobile, so probably Devin and Henry, this is your field. Superdata put the global mobile market at more than $25 billion last year. Whether you think that's the right figure or not, basically it's big, and it was 20% up on the year before. When you look ahead, I mean, how much longer can we expect that rate of growth to continue for? Let's start there. I mean, do you think that this is a rate of growth that we're going to see continue for the next 2, 3, 4 years?
I think so. I think you're seeing China starting to slow down, but then you're going to have other markets like India that are going to be popping up. South America hasn't realized its potential either. So, I think if business models maintain, if free-to-play continues to be sort of dominant, then I think there's the ceiling isn't quite there yet. So definitely big markets to be tapped. So yeah, I do think the next few years will be filled with sort of continued massive growth in mobile.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, I think it's important for this kind of a question to break down what kind of growth you're looking at. When you look at user growth, what Devin said is absolutely true by territory. So, India, South America, for example, I think there are people still activating smartphones. We haven't even talked about Africa yet. So, I mean, there's a lot of frontiers that we have yet to cover. I don't think that kind of growth is going to happen in more mature markets like the US. However, I do think the monetization will still continue going up. So if you look at new device activations or even apps being installed today versus a year ago, it's relatively flat. In the West, let's take North America for example, but if you look at per user monetization, that continues to go up. So spot number 25 on the top grossing charts today means a very different thing than it did a year ago, and a very, very different thing than it meant 2 years ago. I think that will likely still happen for quite some time, so it's hard to say where this will end up evening out, or if it ever really will, because free to play sort of has some amazing wings that it can use to fly to very, very great heights. But I do think that it's going to continue for some time.
Yeah, I mean, so on the new market side there, I mean, first of all, I find it interesting you talk about China slowing down, whereas, I mean, as a journalist, I talk to developers all the time, and a lot of the journalists think like that's actually the next place they have to start looking, whereas maybe you need to go beyond that already. You need to start looking at Latin America, you need to start looking at Southeast Asia. Would you say that's about accurate?
I mean, I would say yes, but it's difficult to do so because the revenue is not really there yet. So when we think about, say, India or South America at Scopely, it still is an afterthought because we're still establishing ourselves in parts of the East that are much more well established. There's still, a lot to do in the West. A lot of times I like to say, I use the analogy about space exploration. It's like, yeah, we should go to the moon, but we still don't really know what's at the bottom of our own ocean, and so there's a lot more that we can do, I think, in certain territories. So I think it will take sort of less mature companies to go out there and be able to take that risk, so to speak, at least be able to hang on for a few years until that market catches up to where the revenue is meaningful for the larger companies.
Yeah, I mean, you don't think that the obstacles in tackling these markets where English isn't spoken natively or particularly fluently, or they're not too great for kind of smaller companies? I mean, at least in the more traditional market for consoles, the only companies that would operate in, say, Latin America would be your EAs, your Ubisofts, your Activisions, which had the infrastructure to actually put it off. Do you think that in the mobile world, which, you know, the smaller developers are actually struggling a bit at the moment, that they can actually make something play over the next few years in these new territories?
Yeah, I guess I'm partly formulating this idea as we're talking about it, but actually I think it's a pretty smart approach. The barriers to entry are just so different on mobile versus console. I mean, it is a lot harder to distribute a boxed product in Latin America than it is to go onto iTunes Connect and check off Peru and Colombia and Chile. You know, so I do think that actually could be an interesting opportunity. You know, years ago there were companies that focused on the Android platform versus iOS, which was certainly not popular at the time, and a couple of those, Kiwi, Purblue, et cetera, have done pretty well for themselves by kind of going where the market wasn't looking, so to speak. I actually think that's a really great idea, personally.
Yeah. I mean, so one of the other things that could drive growth, I mean, new kinds of players. Now, this idea that the mobile hasn't particularly successfully done core games or catered to the core audience has been present in conferences for the last 2 or 3 years. There's been a lot of companies that have said, we're doing mid-core, core for mobile, but I've only really started noticing it being done successfully or persuasively in the last year or so. I mean, what is your view on that? And do you think, and what is going to be the effect of more core gamers or more core-facing products actually coming to mobile in greater numbers and with greater reach? Olli?
So in my previous life, before joining Mindfield Games, I used to work for Amplifier, which you probably know as Unity Ads, better nowadays. And the reason I joined them was because when I was making mobile games at that point, I'm a core gamer, I'm a hardcore gamer, that's why I do VR. So when I open up an app store or I open up Android, where do I find those games? All I find is the top grossing games, which are usually like Candy Crush or something really simple. And for my type of gamers, it's impossible to find anything. That is the search problem has been there on mobile for ages at this point. And I think it's growing even worse at the moment, because one reason I left mobile development and went for VR was that I couldn't get any more of my game found. If I made a good core game, say sold it for $5 to $10 or something, no sales. No whatsoever, just lost in the void, and when user acquisition costs are what they are, it's impossible to make money out of core games at that point.
Well, I think that the hope with core gamers coming to mobile in greater numbers is that they'd actually bring their spending habits. Like, I don't play very many mobile games myself because the games don't suit my taste, but I do spend a lot of money on games. And so I feel like people like me, and it's not like an insignificant number based on how much I'd be willing to spend on a game that really grabbed me. I mean, I think we're still waiting to be persuaded. I mean, how do you think about this when you're looking ahead, Devin?
I mean, I'm always trying to look. The majority of our titles are casual, and that's a result of the market, and it's a result of the developers that are creating games. But I think more and more, we've got a lot of IP that suits very well to core gaming. So, we're always trying to find developers and the right game for the right IP. So, Alien, we're not going to make a match 3.
Give it a try.
But I think the last couple of years, with Hearthstone and like games like Vainglory, I think we're starting to see a new style of gameplay. I think the real challenge was finding the right gameplay mechanics on mobile, and by definition, a core game doesn't really translate to mobile because it's not really a core platform. So finding those bite-sized gameplay moments where you're still involved in a long sort of core gameplay loop is, I think, the real challenge. And now you're starting to see really, really solid developers doing that. The RPGs are coming to the West now, that were sort of a hallmark of the East. So, I mean, I think we're seeing more and more core gameplay coming, and I, for one, am excited about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, Nizar, do you have anything to add here? I mean, you understand the tech side of it perhaps better than anybody else on the stage. I mean, one of the things that the core gamers really demand is a certain level of visual fidelity, a certain depth to the gameplay. I mean, how quickly are we going to get to a place where a tablet or a mobile phone is going to be able to provide these things in better than it can at the moment?
Yeah, so actually the funny thing is that actually mobile hardware is already there. So earlier this morning I presented a bit about view on mobile VR, and one of the things I showed is if you take today's high-end smartphone or tablet, the performance of that device is already above the previous generation of console, the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. And it's catching up quite quickly with the performance of the next, or what is now called current generation, PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. So the hardware, processing power inside is as capable as these consoles. But there is a perception within the community that's still a mobile phone, maybe with Java games days, so it's not a device I'm going to develop hardcore games for. There's also the problem with the form factor. It's a tiny screen, you don't have the controls, it's not the experience you get if you play console or PC games. But the hardware today is capable, or as capable as consoles. Our view is actually mobile VR could be the use case that will unlock finally core gaming on mobile devices. So I was going to say, if you take a mobile VR device based on a smartphone like the Gear VR, and you plug the phone in the device and put it on your headset, and you go and try an Oculus Rift, which is connected to a PC, what you will see is the same experience. You're in a virtual world, immersed in a virtual world. So for once, mobile devices will be on par with PCs and consoles in terms of the experience. You will not have, of course, the same processing capability. The battery life is a problem, but at least it's the same user experience. Unlike with traditional mobile gaming, where you're playing with a tiny device, you're not playing with game controllers and a big screen. So that could be a game changer for mobile gaming.
Mm-hmm. Peter, I'd just like to bring you in at this point. I mean, I thoroughly agree with Nizar. Like the prospect of VR on mobile is actually what's really making me think, well, maybe that would be my entry point for VR, and that's something that interests me a lot more than the majority of mobile games that I see out there. I mean, do you think, has the importance of mobile VR to this early period of the uptake of VR been lost with all the discussion around Rift 5 and all these much higher price headsets that would demand a lot more of the user's bank account, their PC and so on and so forth? What is your view of the potential of mobile in breaking the market?
No, I mean, I think mobile's huge, and I think for every, I read once, for every one HMD tethered, there's going to be three mobile, units. And the idea that you can pass this around, and I developed co-developed a museum app at my last VR studio, and I think there's tons of potential, and I think that's really the entry point where people are going to try it out, figure out what they want about VR, what they like about VR, and then slowly adopt the more expensive units. So for us, I mean, we're looking at both, but right now we're kind of targeting a little bit the higher end experiences because of our collaborations and kind of the way we think about what's next for VR. But by no means that diminish what we're doing. I love Gear VR, and I think that's really the way to go. I actually have a project just for Gear VR that we're working on. Okay.
I mean, Olli, you seem to want to get in there somewhere.
Yeah, it's what I really wanted to comment that for me that mobile is like the ultimate device for gaming if you're a developer, because everybody has one in a pocket, everybody can just flip it out and play it. But then when you add the VR aspect into it, it brings more, but it also takes something away, because now when I take out my mobile phone, and then I take out my Gear VR box, just a moment, I'll just put it on, and then I flip on the system, and then I put it on head. It's much more complicated. And I'm also losing a lot of the aspects of VR, actually. But it is a viewing device at that point, for me, the mobile stuff, because I'm using the touchscreen on the Gear VR to change things, and I don't have any kind of hand control. That's like the first thing people do when they put on a VR headset. They look like, oh, my hands, oh, I can't see them. Sad. But I think the mobile VR, it's great first experience for people, because that really opens your eyes and people start to figure out that, okay, this VR is not as bad as it was in the 90s. And then you start to upgrade it. Okay, now you have tried the mobile VR. Try something with the head tracking. Oh, I can look behind things. Okay, and now try the Vive, and you can actually walk inside the virtual world. So you're building up the experience. And that's what I'm really interested to see when that starts to happen on the mobile too. When we start to get mobile devices that are actually thought to be virtual reality devices and not just the cardboard stuff.
Yeah, okay.
I agree.
Just coming back on a point, I totally agree with what you said about mobile being the kind of ultimate device for gaming, because it has just transformed a world of people into gamers that never could have imagined being a gamer in the past, and maybe would never call themselves a gamer to this day. I think for a long time, core has been synonymous with games that monetize. And that's sort of a thing that I believe personally, as I look to the future, will actually change. For example, we have a game called Yahtzee with Buddies. It's a top 25 grossing game. You couldn't come up with a more casual game than that. It is as casual gets, and it monetizes better than the vast majority of core games. So I think what you're going to see in the future, not only are just our core games coming to mobile, but games with larger degrees of monetization, even if they appear on the surface to be casual. And I think that's just because the economics of making an arcade game don't always make sense for companies that aren't a few people.
Yeah, I agree.
That's interesting. You're kind of detailing an audience shift, because then what does core mean, right? If the casual gamers, a billion of them become, high monetizing players who play 25, 30 minutes a day, I mean, that's a core gamer.
That's right. I mean, I look at 8-Ball Pool. It's like, okay, so 8-Ball Pool is a pool game, which is traditionally thought of as a casual game, or maybe Cash King Islands, Pirate King. Sorry, I've been playing that game for a while. Pirate Kings, casual game. It's just spinning a wheel and then flinging something. I mean, but those games are monetizing and engaging people in the way that a hardcore strategy game would, which I think is something new, and is in large part because people are walking around with a device and they can play 5-minute sessions 20 times a day, as opposed to having to go home, lock yourself in a room. If you're a father of 2 young kids and you have a wife who doesn't want you just playing computer games all day, it's very difficult to do. But I can still get my fix as a core gamer in these little short bursts, regardless of what genre I'm playing.
Yeah, so I mean, I wasn't going to talk about the death of consoles, but rather begs the question, doesn't it? I mean, you've got Nizar was talking about how mobile technology is already roughly at the point of the last generation. I mean, that goes like that. I personally believe there's a point at which the returns on pushing the pixels actually decreases in terms of the user experience. I mean, what do you see as ultimately the role of, say, the mobile phone within that gaming ecosystem going forward? Because it seems like, if you want a VR headset, you either want a mobile device or a PC, and that could be a huge thing for games. Mobiles aren't going anywhere because they're so multifunction. You've got this console starting to look a little bit archaic within all of that, really, and you could just as easily say Xbox is Xbox Live as it is an actual box, right? So, what's your view of that? How's that ecosystem going to change?
Yeah, I mean, look, I have a very particular perspective on this, and personally, I do see the convergence of all screens coming to one, and if I had to pinpoint which one that would be, and I think everyone sort of is talking about that, it is mobile in some form. Not that things can't live on other screens, they can certainly live on bigger screens, but I think it's actually eventually going to all stem from the device we're walking around with in our pocket. I think today, personally, you hear a lot about Apple TV, killing consoles. You hear a lot about mobile killing consoles. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, because there's still a generation, several generations of people who've grown up as gamers, buying discs and putting them into a machine to play them. And I think that entire generation, let's just call it everyone over 25 years old, if they go out and want to buy a gaming system, they're not thinking about a mobile phone. They'll probably play games on their phone. But when you talk about kids that are, in their teens right now, who are growing up with all this stuff happening, when they have the purchasing power to actually go out and spend $500 on something that they're going to play games on or more, I don't think they're really going to care whether it's made by Microsoft or Apple or whether it lives in the living room or wherever. They're going to want something that they can use on every screen, whether they're on an airplane or playing on their phone or sitting at home in front of their TV. So I think that's where Apple TV and those types of devices start to get really interesting. And I think when you talk about VR and other types of entertainment living on mobile, it's kind of all coming together as one, but it's going to take some time.
Yeah, so Peter, do you have anything to add to that? Because VR at the moment really feels like showpiece technology to me. I mean, the majority of the headsets are tethered. You need a big old computer to actually make them work in the first place, Gear VR aside, but you say you're targeting the higher end platforms, and a lot of this discussion seems to be around mobile being a general future for gaming as a whole. I mean, how do you see let's not go 5-10 years in the future, but just the next 2 or 3 years, I mean, with the experiences that the Rogue Initiative are making, I mean, how are people actually going to experience those? Is that going to be in-home, or do you imagine there'll be a new kind of arcade or movie theatre type setup that could be put into place there?
No, right now we're doing things strictly for, PlayStation 4, Morpheus,
Yeah.
PSVR, Oculus and such. It's funny, going back to the consoles, I really feel like consoles will exist in some form just for those guys that still want the hardcore AAA experience. Like you want to play Tomb Raider or the robust social aspects of being on a console, the ease of plugging it in, I think. But that's where I think I love AAA. I love all kinds of games, and I'm hardcore too. But I think if I want to play a AAA game, I might get on the PS4 before anything else. And then everything else, you're right, is kind of flowing more towards social. I'll just really add that I think people who don't even realize they're gamers are gamers, right? I mean, our wives and girlfriends and daughters who would maybe not even associate with the moniker of being a gamer play a lot more games than they think they do, or compared to their hardcore brother or husband. So it's really very interesting to me how that whole paradigm shift is happening in the way we identify with our audiences. No, but for us, it really is. I think there's going to be a place where the gateway being cardboard, and then Gear VR, and then they're going to say, what's next? What's going to do? What more interactivity could I have? How much more immersion can I experience? How much more fidelity can I get? And I think things like Oculus and Vive are pretty amazing.
Yeah, they
and
are,
when you try them and you play with them, you play with those controls where you think it's really where it's at.
The toy box demo.
Toy box
the best thing I played last year was that toy box demo.
Completely agree. The touch controls right now I tried them all. I feel like they're kind of the one that's probably going to lead the charge in how you interact in VR. And I think mobile has to catch up with that. Like how do you back to game mechanics and controls in mobile. There's still a bit of a disconnect between that and consoles, but that's quickly shrinking, right?
Yeah.
But I think the use case for VR going forward the next year or two, controls for VR the next year or two are still things we're watching. We have to pivot in. We talk about looking forward, in the future.
Yeah. Well, I mean, on that point, so you're not a games company. You're just a more general kind of view of VR than that. Like Rogue Initiative's going to be working on sort of film-based VR experiences and other things like that. Is that correct?
Yes, we're actually starting. Our focus is in virtual reality, creating interactive virtual reality content. But we have partners that are going to enable us to deliver that content in other different.
Yeah. So I wonder what you think, because I think obviously with the games industry, when we talk about VR, we talk about VR games. How important are these other kinds of experiences going to be to that market? Because when I think about, the ability to say watch a live NBA game using a Gear VR headset, that seems to me the sort of thing that's really going to break it wide above and beyond like a high-end game from Valve that you need to invest $2,000 to actually experience in the first place. What's your take?
On spectating and things
Well,
like that?
I mean,
Yeah,
just
other
the
angles?
breadth of possible VR experiences, which I think is not something in the games industry we talk about as much as being the catalyst for growth of the VR market in general.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, you see a lot of movement in that already, right?
Yeah.
Of people creating spectator events. And I think there's something really cool about, jumping into hanging over a boxing ring or
Yeah, or films or anything. I mean, when you look at the ticket sales for movies, they do eclipse copy sales for games. Like the actual number of engaged people watching TV, going to the movies is actually higher for that kind of experience than it is in games, I think. I mean, is that the sort of the thought in your head when you start something like the Rogue Initiative with that broader remit?
Yeah, a little bit. And our content is by nature going to be episodic so that we can kind of capitalize on that sentiment. But also we have some great filmmakers we're working with. They're going to also take the IP and work around the interactive experiences, if that answers your question. More so we can create some places where it exists outside and it's written and created in that fashion. But of course interactive VR is still where we're kind of focusing right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a comment for that when you were asking that how much will games be part of the future of VR. Even though I'm a game developer, I think what we consider games nowadays will be a really small part of it, in fact, because most of the sales are going to come from people participating in something. Let's say I want to buy a ticket to the next Olympic Games. Instead of me in the front seat right next to Berlusconi and Putin will be sitting 360 video camera, so I can actually be inside the event. I think that is going to be some sort of a killer app. I could put stuff into my room. I've ordered the IKEA catalog that what would this sofa look on there? Oh, okay, it doesn't. Maybe change the color and then just press buy. It's like the actual current thought, what are games and what is it's going to totally change in VR. It's like most of the experiences are going to actually be games, but we don't consider them those.
Yeah,
like
yeah,
say,
right.
like for example, a movie where you can actually affect the plot somehow as a character there, and
Yeah.
that's going to be the best
It
part.
just
of it.
introduces interactivity right across the board to any number of different experiences. So yeah, it's powerful. I mean, Nizar, do you have any thoughts on how the technology is going to progress on that front? I mean, I know that ARM is looking at mobile VR at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, to maybe also comment on what the panelists have been saying. I mean, in ARM, we don't see mobile displacing other technology like people talk about. Will mobile gaming displace console gaming? We see more mobile as driving now all these industries and sectors. In the past, maybe it was PC driving more software development. We think mobile is driving the way. An example we've seen recently in China is console developers in that country jumped on mobile platforms and started putting them in boxes, Android, and shipping them in China. And the reaction in the market in China currently is quite positive. At GDC, there will be Chinese players, big Chinese players in the gaming space launching Android-based consoles that are using the same chips that go into smartphones. If you have been at CES or followed what was happening at CES, automotive has picked up quite a lot on some of the technology innovation coming from mobile. The head display was all rendered using chips that come from smartphone. Backseat infotainment and entertainment is becoming a reality. So mobile is driving a lot of other parallel sectors. Funny thing we have in ARM, I look after the developer ecosystem, mobile particularly, but any developer in smart TV, set-top box, wearables, and even automotive, we put that in ARM under the mobile ecosystem, even though these devices are not mobile, because they will all leverage the technology that will come from mobile devices. So for us, we push one roadmap in mobile, and that will influence a lot of the sectors. What we try to do from our perspective is increase the compute capability so that the content that will run on platforms coming from mobile will be as capable as connected platforms. Because the biggest challenge we have in mobile is that you have to deliver the experience powered by a battery. So power consumption is the biggest problem. Otherwise, we could have put capabilities as capable in the PC space. We don't do that because the smartphone, for example, has to sustain a whole day of usage. So we are increasing the compute capability of the processors going into these devices that range maybe 30%, 50% year on year, and that is allowing these devices to become more capable, so that can run heavy content. A comment, for example, about hand interaction in mobile. How can we do that? Mobile devices have cameras, and you can use the camera to detect the hands and send the information back. We work with some companies that are already experimenting using that. But devices, mobile devices in the future could embed more cameras that would allow you to do natural hand tracking, recognition of the environment you're doing, so you have accurate representation of your hands or whatever you want in a virtual world. So for us, mobile is really driving the technology, and we're constantly pushing the compute capability so you can develop that advanced content on mobile platforms that you think you can do only maybe on PC or connected devices like consoles.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about technology. You're going to get there eventually, aren't you? You just need a long enough time scale to operate on. I mean, we're running out of time. We'll have a question and answer session in just a second. I'd like to finish on one point, which is about AR. I mean, it's a harder one to talk about because it's not really here in the way you want it to be yet. So 2 parts. Has anyone tried Magic Leap, and is it really amazing? And also, well, first of all, that one. Has anyone tried Magic Leap on the panel?
I think nobody is allowed to say even if they
Yeah,
have played.
yeah, fair enough. All right. And also, Epic's Tim Sweeney, who is a guy who knows what he's talking about, actually said that he thinks AR is going to be the really big revolution. It's going to surpass VR in terms of reach, mass market appeal and utility within 10 years, which actually categorizes VR as this sort of stepping stone tech. I mean, does anyone have any thoughts on that?
I agree with that 100%.
Yeah.
I don't think today, obviously, from a business perspective, everyone knows VR isn't there yet, and for us, like, you know, as a content owner, it's actually, you know, we're not really concerned with which platform we're out on. We don't know, whatever the dominant platform is where we want to tell our stories. So we're looking for the best places to do that and the best partners to do that with. But for VR, it's like you've got this big thing on your head. It's again, they're tethered. I mean, Google, I think, announced yesterday that they're going to do a standalone, which is cool. But
Yeah.
and then there's the battery problem with mobile. I think if we're talking about the future of games, I think what could be really exciting is, like, you know, let's talk about like a contact lens that has like a you know, a game on it, and that's where you play, or something lighter, something that isn't so intrusive and blocks your vision. But
Quite.
For AR, it's like, well, VR is the future in a sense that, okay, we have it, but it will be mainstream in a couple of years or 3 years or so. With AR, I originally wasn't that excited about it, because all the AR apps that you see are like, oh, I can see a UFO through my phone on the sky. That's pretty much it, and that's like the lamest thing ever. But now that I'm starting...
Sorry, guys, for the people who are developing that app out there.
Yeah, it was really cool. Okay, but for AR, let's talk about like crazy ideas that I have heard people thinking about, the stuff that they have seen with Magic Leap and what you could do it. For example, instead of a phone, you would have your glasses. This is pretty much the same level of technology as having the contact lenses with everything, and Elon Musk solving the issue of battery life and so on. But for example, imagine that you have only no lenses and you want to make a call. You look at your hand, slide there and select a picture of your friend and press a button and start talking. Maybe even see your friend there above your hand. That is pretty much what we can do with AR. And that kind of technology, possible perhaps within the 10 coming years or so. So pretty close.
10 years. All right.
The way that I look at it a little bit is that AR is mobile and VR is console. Like, I actually think that both will exist. I mean, it's so much easier to imagine what a immersive VR game experience looks like. Whereas it's so much easier to imagine what a really nice life experience looks like in AR. You know, the fact that you could actually like watch, you know, the Yankees play up here while talking to your wife over there. I mean, that's pretty sweet. You know, and there's a million things that you could do like that. VR, I think, is going to be initially for the hardcore. It'll be interesting to see how they evolve, but I think there's definitely room for both.
And I think also the VR might become a more sort of artistically focused. I mean, because the idea of being inside a world designed, like created by Pixar animators, is a totally different proposition to actually just having things superimposed onto the actual world, isn't it? Like they ultimately diverge in interesting ways.
And eventually, I don't think those will be two different devices. You will probably have a good AR device that is totally capable of doing VR also.
Fair enough. All right, at this point, we are going to take some questions, and you definitely had one. Yes. Do you want to get us going?
Yeah, so this relates to the thing that was discussed earlier on, the core game discussion, which I find really interesting. We have this team, and my team members have spent thousands and thousands of hours playing Blizzard games, right? So the guys, we really love the core games. And at the same time, so now there's this struggle. We want to make mobile games and bring this to mobile. And I think that I'd like to hear your vision on this. Is very much also the input device that's the problem. So it's not just the session length. So on the one hand, we have the session length issue, right? The bite-sized chunks that we need for free to play. But you could argue that a core gamer is willing to spend loads of hours on the device, right? So he's a core gamer, so he doesn't need bite-sized chunks. He's willing to spend hours and hours in one go. And at the same time, as you say, the processing capability of the tablets is great, right? So you can have real good graphics and everything's real good. But the one thing that I hear back is, well, it's not going to work because I like mouse clicking. Mm-hmm. So I was wondering what your vision is on this. So.
Yeah, and I think there was a point I was referring to earlier why smartphones or tablet gaming hasn't developed into that core gaming that people expect, which is nothing to do with the capability of that device from processing perspective, because we have pushed the boundary above the previous generation of consoles. But the device itself, the form factor, cannot deliver that core gaming experience that your guys that play Blizzard games are used to. They're used to a big screen, they're used to the keyboards, the mouse, the controls. And the point I wanted to make about mobile VR is that for once, we don't have that barrier by definition. The form factor doesn't matter anymore because once you put the VR headset on, then whether you're using connected VR or mobile VR, the experience is the same. You will have to have the same controls if you want to have the same experience, but the platform is not limited by the form factor from the start. That was my point.
You know, I just want to chime in on the form factor thing because I agree, Nizar, with what you're saying. I think the curse of the form factor, if harnessed properly, is kind of a blessing. I'm actually pleasantly surprised that I'm the one who gets to mention this on stage, but I think Clash Royale, which if you guys haven't played, I would encourage you to check out, is probably from Supercell, it's a game that's in test launch, it's probably the best example of a game that is almost impossible to define as core or casual. The depth of that game is immense. You know, it's an extremely challenging game at the highest levels. I've got friends who spend thousands of hours. I'm actually, we're both in a clan with the guy who was a couple days ago ranked #1 in the world. This guy is as hardcore gets when it comes to core games. At the same time, it's a game that's super accessible. It's 2D, it's tap to drop your troops, that's all you need to do. So I think that what's really interesting about that is the way that Supercell has looked at the form factor of the device and tried to make a game that is highly competitive, that is highly strategic, which is their bread and butter, but really fits what's happening and the way that people are interacting with devices. Yes, they've also addressed session length to a certain extent, although you need to play for 3 to 4 minutes straight, so it's not a perfect solve, and it's still really working.
There's no time gate. You can play for hours and hours and hours, and you know the only gate is you'll start losing. So, and then you're either forced to spend money or become more skilled.
Yeah, so I mean that's a really good example. I think from my perspective, to more directly answer your question, I just think our definition of core versus casual is going to change. I don't know that we're going to be having that conversation 10 years from now as much as like, is it a good game? Who's playing the game? And it kind of doesn't really matter whether it's core, mid-core, casual. Those lines start to blur pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I would concur with that. I think when mobile first arrived, and in a big way with the iPhone, it was more that I'd never really even entertained the idea of being able to play a game in this or that situation. So it wasn't, I do think that those early days, very, very casual games, and they aren't going to be to everyone's taste, but I think that distinction is going to go away. It was kind of arbitrary and false to begin with, really.
Yeah, we've come a long way from paper toss. I think, I don't know, I spend hours I play Hearthstone and Vainglory. Those are core games. I'm playing them at the session lengths or core session lengths. I mean, for me, I'd rather spend time on my tablet than I would on console or PC. And I kind of skipped the PC game. I wasn't a PC gamer, so it's now my core gameplay is happening on a tablet. So I guess I'm just one use case, but I think there's a lot of players doing that as well on those games.
I come out of a film music background, so forgive me for bringing some other insights, but this is about the future of gaming. And can I just throw some provocations at you?
Yeah,
and
go
see which of them
more the better.
Which of them strike home, perhaps. Look, the first thing that hits me with this is like being 10 years ago with film people. Firstly, there's an innate assumption here that games have a substantial part of the entertainment life of people in the place, and the real with film, of course, that's proved to be wrong. Its percentage has dropped enormously to gaming and other forms of entertainment. Where do you see this moving for gaming? I mean, do you see it keeping its place in terms of what we do for entertainment, and how is that going to change the nature of your industry? That links also with democratization. I mean, the big theme in music and visual media has been the democratization of here, of course. Here it's really noticeable. You guys, it's like a monolith where you've got the big companies and you've got the people who absorb the games or use the games to pay the money, and YouTube and streaming and the changes in the cost of production and so on. It all changed that in other spheres. Why are you immune? And that's one area of maybe you've got some. And I mean, there will be big people left standing, the Foxes, and just as in music and TV and film.
Yeah.
But what will be the position in gaming? And on VR AR, I mean, to what extent is the industry linking up with the two areas that are making advances in that space, which is the adult entertainment industry, and also theme parks? I mean, because that's where most of the work's happening.
Okay, well, two quite different questions there. The first being, like, is gaming immune to the sort of pressures that have disrupted and undermined things like film and TV? I think Olli touched on maybe an interesting possibility there, which is that with VR, it kind of breaks down barriers between media anyway, and brings interactivity into everything. I don't know if anyone else has.
I mean, I can briefly comment on that. So, from our perspective, we're seeing, and I'm in the mobile group at Fox, so I'm constantly talking about how people are spending more time on mobile devices, and telling the rest of the company that they need to pay attention to doing more with us. So, I think it's equally important for us to gain our audience and have them enjoy our content anywhere they are. So, from my perspective, I see people shifting over to new platforms as a positive. Yes, home entertainment is a shrinking business. DVD sales are down, and that's worrying. But if you look, I mean, our games business is very healthy and growing. So, I think for us, it's really all about finding where the audiences are and making sure we can extend our franchises and build our brands wherever that might be.
It's like the home entertainment business is interesting, and you know more than I do, I'm sure, but how it's moving to digital a lot, right? And it's a whole shift in how you distribute content on that side. You can download Unreal 4 now for free, right? And everything's so accessible. Unity is so accessible that I really believe that everyone will be making games soon if they really wanted to. I think a team of guys in a garage, who knows, 5 years from now could make something like Call of Duty. I'm not kidding, like with do-it-yourself, home motion capture stuff, and engines and animations and everything on the marketplace. It's just going to get easier and easier. So we'll see a lot of content, a lot better content than it used to be. Back in the day, I mean, remember indie games earlier on, you're like, some are cool, but most aren't. Now indie games are amazing. There's so many great things. I play way more indie games than I do AAA. I still love AAA. There's still places for it, for those big monolith studios to create something with a $100, $200 million budget. I mean, it came from that, but at the end of the day, there's so much more value to me in these small little bite-sized amazing experiences that you can get in different kinds, for $5 here, $5 there on Steam and on the App Store that I cherish. And I think those things will just get more prevalent as time goes on and things become easier, honestly.
Yeah, as an indie game developer, I got a bit of man crush there, hearing that one from you. But yeah, it is true. Indie developers, we have the possibility to do more stuff than the AAA studios. That was the reason on early mobile, for example, all the players who gamed there and win in the beginning, like Rovio and other stuff, they were small. They had no background in big game industries like PC or consoles. And the same thing is happening now on VR. And one thing about creating content for VR that I think is really exciting is that both on Unreal and Unity, you can pretty much in really near future start to implement the environment around you inside the virtual reality. So for example, I want to build this hall inside VR and add a couple of enemies and then decide some AI I want to add to them and see what happens. And be inside with these creations of mine, like God games made inside a game creator environment. That I find really interesting.
Yeah, God games in VR seem really fun to me.
They're going to be awesome.
Yeah, so I actually come out of film and TV as well, and could probably speak about consolidation and democratization of these types of industries for an hour. It's probably a great talk for another Casual Connect at a different time. But I think that if you look at like the last 5 years of the games industry, the democratization of the industry is just inherent. The reason why developers moved to mobile in large part was because they didn't need to deal with the nasty old publishers and could just sign on to iTunes Connect and submit a game, and that was all the access they needed. So I think that sort of from my perspective, and again, I could probably go into great detail and we can talk afterwards, I think the film industry learned a lot from the music industry, and I think the games industry has learned a lot from both. And in the film industry, it sort of took a little while for the middle to get squeezed out, it seems like, and there were still some kind of mid-sized movies and shows being made. Now it's really small stuff and really big stuff. I think that's sort of where this industry has been for a few years, and where it's going to continue to go. So you have amazing indie games from super small companies that you've never heard of, and then you've got incredible big experiences, and there's not a lot in between. And just the economics of it don't make a lot of sense. I think that that's something that the industry, whether they sort of were cognizant of it or not, just embraced inherently, I think based on what happened in other industries.
Yeah, I actually do think that the indies are pushing their way back up into the middle as well. A game like The Witness, which just came out, is a perfect example of what you could call a AAA indie game. I think you're going to see a lot more of that.
I certainly don't mean quality. I certainly don't mean quality.
No. But also scope. I mean, you can play that game for 30 hours, amazing production values and so on, and it cost about $15 million or something crazy like that. In any case, that's all we've got time for. Thank you for coming along. There was another part of that question, adult entertainment, I hear, so a few canals over that way, I think, is the where you find that. Thank you for coming. Thanks to all the panelists. Give them a round of applause.